We got a good one for you today, as with the NFL draft just days away, I want to look back at some of the worst in NFL draft history. We are going to be going through every single slot in the first round, picks 1 through 32, to try to identify who is the very worst player or the very worst pick in general at that spot. Now, this will only be covering the Super Bowl era, so 1968 and on, as I didn't want to really cover the drafts beforehand where everything was a mess and the first ever draft pick never even played. It'd be too easy to put those players as the worst at like every slot. And the last little notes before we get started with how I determined who was the worst. Now, I did tend to be a bit more forgiving to teams back in the 70s and 80s because I feel like at least then scouting wasn't very good, and in the 2000s, 2010s, and even 2020s, you have less of an excuse. Scouting gets better and better with every generation that comes, so you get less of an excuse if you pick a bad player now compared to when you picked a bad player in the 70s. Also, I didn't go with players who were just destroyed by injuries. It'd be too easy to just go through the first round pick, see who was the least productive, and see the insert player got destroyed by injuries, and I don't really consider that a bust. I just consider that unlucky. It's players who were drafted and were just bad. But with all that out of the way now, I think we're ready to begin. You're going to have to bear with me for the first 2 to 3 picks, because I feel like the first 2 to 3 picks are pretty clear cut. I feel like if anyone were to make this list, they'd pretty much agree with the first 2 or 3, and you know the stories of these players, but it's picks 4 through 32 that are the really interesting ones. But you're going to have to bear with me. Pick number 1. And to no surprise, it is Jamarcus Russell. Not just the biggest bust in number 1 draft pick history, the biggest bust in NFL draft history, and you can argue maybe the biggest bust in sports history, as you could find dozens and dozens of videos just talking about how bad Jamarcus Russell was, how bad the entire situation was, from his work ethic to everything else. Jamarcus Russell has been covered in great detail, but I will just keep it short and tell you what he did at LSU, and by his 3rd year playing as a junior, he jumped all the way up to 28 touchdowns to 8 picks, and the potential was there. And when you look at the pre-draft scouting reports, it's hard to find a more universal scouting report than the one that was on Jamarcus Russell, of everyone just saying, he's that guy. Jamarcus Russell is going to be a top 5 quarterback. Jamarcus Russell is the clear and obvious pick. Jamarcus Russell has all the potential in the world. And the Raiders, you can't blame them in that regard for making the selection at number 1, but my goodness, it did not work out in the slightest. Passing up on guys like Calvin Johnson, Adrian Peterson, and Joe Thomas, all either current Hall of Famers or future Hall of Famers, Jamarcus Russell arrived to the Raiders, and it was pretty clear he didn't have the work ethic to become a quarterback. Now, if I'm going to defend Jamarcus Russell a little bit, he was going through a lot of family issues and had some addictions off the field, but that does not give him an excuse to give his team exactly 0 effort, it felt like, and we all know the DVD story. I don't need to just ram the DVD story down your throat because everyone knows it, but for those who don't, he was given multiple, tapes, DVDs, and watch film and all this, and he never even opened them. They were blank tapes, blank DVDs, blank everything, and he never even noticed. On top of that, he showed up overweight. I mean, at one point he was nearing that 300-pound mark, and when you have a bad work ethic, not studying, you're out of shape, you have a lot of personal issues, you could see how it translated onto the field, and didn't play much as a rookie. When he finally got in his 2nd year, 5-10, and it wasn't looking terrible, 13 touchdowns, 8 picks, and at least he's maybe gonna take the step in the right direction, but then it just fell apart in 09, and 2-7, 3 touchdowns, 11 picks, couldn't even complete 50% of his passes, and he was out the door in a very quick manner, and Jamarcus Russell quickly went down as one of the greatest busts in draft history. The number 2 overall pick, yet another one that's pretty obvious, and that is Ryan Leaf for the Chargers, and it's crazy to think that in that draft, there were legit debates between Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf. Now, Peyton Manning, majority favored him, but the fact that there were people who favored Ryan Leaf is just funny to look back at. And if it wasn't for Jamarcus Russell's absolute disaster in Oakland, you can argue that Ryan Leaf would have been the biggest bust in history and was the biggest bust in history up until that point before Russell got to Oakland. Now at Washington State, Leaf was firmly in the Heisman candidacy as he was in the Final Four alongside Peyton Manning, Randy Moss, Charles Woodson, 3 future Hall of Famers, and Ryan Leaf, as he threw for a spectacular 34 touchdowns, 11 picks, nearly 4,000 yards, and he had a great season. And it's the pre-draft scouting that I did the research on, and I came across a quote that I really loved from Mel Kiper, as Mel Kiper, notorious for getting every draft analysis correct. His attention to detail last summer and willingness to put in the time on the practice field that pushed him over the top in terms of developing into a complete quarterback. Leaf is the type of quarterback who can single-handedly put a team in the win column, which at the pro level is the ultimate sign of greatness. And that turned out to be exactly the opposite of what Leaf was, as you can take a look at what he was able to accomplish in his short time in the league. And that rookie season is one of the most abysmal rookie seasons you will ever see. 2 touchdowns to 15 picks. And overall, he was just one of the worst quarterbacks you will ever see step foot on the field, and he was the number 2 overall pick. And on top of that, he was a guy who didn't put in a lot of crazy work and was a bad teammate. I mean, there's the clips of him yelling at reporters and throwing teammates under the bus, and he was just not a good fit. He was not ready for the NFL, and he just was a disaster in every stretch of the imagination. In any way you can formulate a disaster at QB, it is Ryan Leaf. Going 4-17, going 4 wins in your entire career. That is unbelievably bad. Even Jamarcus Russell was able to put together 5 wins in one season with a Raiders team that was also pretty garbage. I know the Chargers were really bad too around this time, but 4 career wins and, over double the amount of interceptions as he had touchdowns, and completed less than 50% of his passes in his entire career. You can make the argument that Ryan Leaf quite literally is the worst quarterback, ever. We got the obvious 2 out the way. Now let's move on to number 3, and that is Bengals quarterback Akili Smith. And before the days of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, the Bengals, they were bad. And I think with Akili Smith, what you really have to talk about is the moves that the Bengals did not make. As it's not who they didn't pick, it's not a matter of that, it's the trade that they declined. As if you remember the legendary Ricky Williams trade that Mike Ditka pulled off to trade his entire draft along with another first-round pick to Washington to take Ricky Williams, that trade, something like that, was offered to Cincinnati for that pick. Cincinnati could have had an entire doubled up on their draft class and acquired more picks next year. They turned it down for Akili Smith. And now you must be thinking to yourself, wow, they turned down 9 draft picks for Akili Smith. They must have really loved this guy. He must be some generational prospect. And no. At Oregon, he was a 1-year wonder, and that 1 year is a phenomenal year. 32 touchdowns and 8 picks and near 4,000 yards, 10 yards plus an attempt. It was a great year, but at the end of the day, he was a 1-year wonder, and he was not some generational crazy prospect. He wasn't even the number 1 quarterback in his own class. Everyone was going crazy about Tim Couch being the number 1 quarterback, and another bust in his own right, but he wasn't even the clear-cut number 1 quarterback in his class, and you turned down a whole bunch of picks for him, and to no surprise, it did not work out. So being the number 3 overall pick, he was still the 3rd QB taken, because not only was Tim Couch number 1, but Donovan McNabb was number 2. Akili Smith, they passed up all of those picks and stuff for the 3rd quarterback in the draft, and as you can see, 1-3, and again, rookie season, you're learning a lot, but in his 2nd season, my goodness, 3 touchdowns in 11 starts, 44 completion percentage, and Akili Smith was quoted as saying this: "I'm kind of baffled they drafted me. 10 games into my 2nd season, they benched me, and it was over after that. And it's fair to be frustrated, but he didn't play good." And again, Bengals, not a good team, probably didn't have the best support system. But you couldn't even complete 50% of your passes. You couldn't even keep an even touchdown interception ratio. And he didn't show any flashes. He didn't show anything. He went 3-14 overall as a starter, and after that second season, it was over. He started 2 more games, lost them both, never threw another touchdown again in the league, and was out at the age of 27. So I just think that this one is a missed opportunity for the Bengals. It was such a bad pick, not just because the player that they got was bad, but what they missed out on was even worse. I said that the first 2 to 3 were pretty clear-cut. Now let's have some fun. Is at number 4, Clelin Ferrell. Yes, we're only going back to 2019. But yes, Clelin Ferrell is my pick for the worst number 4 pick in NFL history. And I know some people may think it's a little early to jump the gun, and trust me, there will be some other players who are, around this draft time who are in this list, but I need to really highlight just how bad of a pick this was. And trust me, this won't be the only time we speak of the name Jon Gruden in this video, as Jon Gruden loved drafting some odd players with his picks in his second stint in the Raiders, and when you look at what Clelin Ferrell did in college, it's a pretty impressive, couple of years. You gather 27 sacks, 50 tackles for loss, but Clelin Ferrell was a prospect widely considered to just be a decent first-round pick. Maybe he'll, make it to day 2, but, he was a guy who was like a mid to late first-round pick at best. And Clelin Ferrell is an example of a player who, I don't often do this when I am watching the draft, but I remember in 2019 watching the draft, and I hear Clelin Ferrell as pick number 4. I laughed because I was like, no way did the Raiders just make this selection. This was a bad pick. This wasn't like a hindsight tells us it was a bad pick. No, a lot of people understood that even in the moment, this was a bad pick. It was a crazy reach. And even looking through some of the scouting reports on Clelin Ferrell, I really wanted to see, was I missing something? Like maybe someone had this high of a grade on him. I looked through a number of them. Multiple people had his pro comparison as Derek Morgan. The other pro comparison, the best one I seen was Frank Clark. When I was looking at where he might go, they immediately skipped the top 10. They're like, okay, in that 10 to 20 range is where he is, at best he could go. People thought late in the teens to like the Titans, and teams had day 2 grades on. I seen scouting reports saying he's a day 2 player at best. Like everywhere no one had him that high. But for some reason the Raiders looked at him and said, yeah, that's a guy we want to spend the 4th overall pick on. And he was immediately outshined by another person picked in that same draft, 4th round pick, Max Crosby. And Max Crosby made that 4th overall pick not look terrible because, they still got an elite edge rusher out of it. But it doesn't ever look good when you have this top 5 pick edge rusher and he has 4 sacks as his best season, and he's off the team after his rookie contract. As we stay on the defensive side of the ball, number 5, the 5th overall pick would be Trev Alberts in the 1994 NFL draft by the Colts. And honestly, it was a little difficult to find a lot of info on what Trev Alberts' scouting report really was, because whenever I look up Trev Alberts, he was the guy who was infamous for being the person picked at number 5 when Mel Kiper was ripping them apart, and Mel Kiper and the Colts GM got into it, and who the heck is Mel Kiper anyway? But Trev Alberts was the guy picked at number 5 with that selection, and that's all you really find on him. Now in some regards, Mel Kiper was pretty right about this being a bad pick, but, he wanted to take Trent Dilfer, so, it wouldn't have gotten much better, but this is why the Colts were picking high in the draft every year, according to him anyway. And the Colts admittedly did have some really bad picks before they got Peyton Manning, but as for Trev Alberts, now he did sustain some injury troubles in a possible 59-ish games. He was unable to make 20 of them due to injuries. He had a dislocated elbow and some concussion issues. But even when he was on the field, he never played well. He only had 69 career tackles, 4 sacks, provided very little value. And there really just isn't a whole lot to talk about when it comes to Alberts, as after his 3rd season, he expressed the desire to retire, and that was really it with him. And pretty hard to draft a top 5 pick and have him be so unnotable. But that's really like all there is to Trev Alberts. At number 6, we are staying on the defensive side of the football for the 3rd straight pick, and we are going with Ohio State edge rusher Vernon Gholston at number 6 for the Jets. And Vernon Gholston, this one's a funny one because it is impressive how little he was able to contribute, as he was drafted to basically be, a big piece of the 3-4 defense, as the 3-4 defense was starting to become bigger and bigger, and, edge rushers were starting to become more prevalent. He was drafted to be that next elite edge rusher for the Jets. And when you look at everything on paper of Vernon Gholston, I really can't blame the Jets in some regards for making the selection, as when you look at what he did at Ohio State, 14 sacks, super productive in his senior year, and his combine was out of this world for a guy in the late 2000s. He ran a 4.5, a 42-inch vertical, 37 reps on the bench. He looked like a beast, and the Jets went all in on him at the number 6 pick. But upon entering the league, Vernon Gholston managed to do something that I haven't seen any of these edge rushers that I had looked through all the draft classes do. In his entire career, for a top 10 pick, he didn't get a single sack, and his entire specialty was being a pass rusher. Like, that is impossibly bad. He didn't start at all as a rookie. He was a rotational guy and special teamer, but in his 2nd season, 3rd season, even when they tried to play him, he was just so unimpressive. I'm pretty sure he didn't do anything. As you can see, 1 QB hit. He touched the QB 1 time in his career. I know he didn't play a crazy ML, but you know how unimpressive you have to be in practice and unimpressive you have to be in every facet of the game to not get any opportunities? You couldn't even stumble his way into a sack. And that is impossibly impressive to the likes that I don't think we'll ever see again. 0 sacks. So Vernon Gholston, I think, is pretty clearly the worst 6th overall pick ever. Now let's take a trip back in time and to the offensive side of the football as we go back to the 1970s. And when you do a video like this, you find out about players you've never heard of before and some wild stories. And Ken MacAfee is a good one at number 7, the Notre Dame tight end. Now, MacAfee at Notre Dame started as a wide receiver, quickly converted to tight end, and when he was put at tight end, he flourished, playing along with Joe Montana at Notre Dame, and it helped turn him into a top 10 pick, and he was not only picked by the 49ers, but he eventually did get to reunite with Joe Montana. Now, everything is pretty normal up until this point. He was a top 10 pick, great career at Notre Dame. As he comes into the NFL, he is finishing up his degree and becoming a dentist, and is multitasking quite a bit, so he's splitting his time between football and school. And as a rookie in his 2nd year, he has pretty identical stats. Not only is he a pretty solid receiving tight end, though, he's a great blocking tight end. And going into his 3rd year, legendary football coach Bill Walsh goes up to him and says, "You're a great blocker and you're quick. I think you could be an all-pro guard, but we have to change offensive scheme a little bit, and the tight end isn't going to be used as much." And this absolute madman, Ken MacAfee, goes right up to the 49ers head coach and says this: "Bill, I lost more games in my rookie year than I lost in high school and college combined. I don't really want to go inside for this team. This team isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I don't want to get my head beat in for nothing. I'm going to go back and finish dental school." So that's exactly what he does. He just leaves football and becomes a dentist, and he told a Bill Walsh and Joe Montana-led 49ers that they were going nowhere anytime soon. And I believe just 2 years later, they won a Super Bowl. So I guess I can't blame the guy for going and pursuing his career. I mean, he's a dentist. He got paid pretty nicely to become a dentist, but I mean, he could have won a Super Bowl, and I don't know, this is a bust, but this guy's pretty crazy. And, I guess the 49ers, they were missing him, as, with Jerry Rice and Joe Montana and everything. They turned out okay. As we go even further back in time, we see number 8 overall pick Larry Stegant from 1970. Now, I apologize for the bit of a struggle of a picture, but 1960s. As you see what he did in college, not impressive, to be honest. He was a dual threat back who could catch the ball out of the backfield, but I mean, he had 2 seasons where 3.5, 3.4 yards per carry. He wasn't exactly an efficient running back. And for my money, Larry Steggin might be the least productive first-round pick in NFL history. And, you know, not the biggest bust, but just the least productive. And the Giants are pretty happy to spend the number 8 overall pick on him. But let's see what he did. Okay, he had 1 catch for 12 yards. And he never ran the ball once as a running back. Now, what I'm not even showing you here is he had 1 catch for 12 yards. He fumbled. He has a fumble, so the only touch he ever got, he fumbled it away. I don't know how you have a first-round pick only do this. This is crazy to me. I would love to have some wild and wacky story like I did with MacAfee or have a reason, but no, I couldn't find anything on him. In 1971, he had 1 career catch and he fumbled it. So, moving on. Back to more recent times, as with the 9th overall pick, my pick for the worst selection is Dee Milliner. The Jets traded away Darrelle Revis, and they would proceed to spend the 9th overall pick on Dee Milliner to be the big Revis replacement, and he was quite the opposite of Darrelle Revis. Now, after looking through numerous scouting reports on Dee, I basically came to the conclusion that he was a unanimous top 10 projected player in this class. Everyone had him as a top 10 guy. He could do just about everything. I mean, he was a guy who was a willing run stopper, could cover well, had physicality, could do just about everything you could want out of a cornerback. And the Jets, you know, needing Darrelle Revis. Now, they didn't use the pick that they traded Revis for to select Dee Milliner, but they used that pick, the 13th overall pick of the same draft, to take Sheldon Richardson, but proceeded to use their very own pick to take Dee, and this is just, I mean, he was just bad from the very beginning. Now with this, you can maybe chalk his struggles up to injury, as he did sustain some major injuries, but in his first season though, he was benched 3 times and had a very up and down season. He finished strong, getting 3 interceptions, 2 in 1 week and 1 in another week, so strong end to his season, but then in the second season, tears his Achilles, he's out for essentially the whole year, and then in his 3rd year, has a wrist injury, out 6 to 8 weeks. So, I mean, I guess you could chalk this one up to he got injured and injuries ruined his career. But even when he played, he wasn't amazing or great, and it's very up and down. This one's a hard one because you can make the argument that injuries are what ruined his career, but I'm not going to, you know, err on that side of things. I see it as, you traded away Darrelle Revis, you proceed to pick a guy to replace him, he's not particularly good, and then he gets injured, and then things go wrong. So this one may be a bit of a controversial one, but Dee Milliner is my pick for the worst 9th overall selection. Jets fans, feel free to debate if he was really that bad, but at number 10, we have the 1981 selection, David Verser for the Bengals, a wide receiver. And, you know, he's a very unproductive player for, you know, a top 10 wide receiver. But even for a guy who was taken that high, you look at his college stats and, I mean, crazy yards per catch. I mean, he was very dangerous, but kind of unspectacular. You're taking a guy top 10, and in 4 years, he had 77 career catches. Now, the near 20 yards per catch is wildly impressive, but that's a very small sample size to be spending that high of a draft pick on a guy like that. And after reading up on him, I feel like Bengals fans who are still around from back then, you know, may not like him too much. So obviously with guys back 70s, 80s, 90s, it's pretty hard to grab scouting reports on them. So what I can tell you, though, is, as I take a look at his stats, very unproductive in the receiving game. Again, though, he maintained that 20 yards per catch, so still dangerous, and he was primarily a guy who was used as a return man. Now, what I can tell you about a moment in his career is in the Super Bowl against the 49ers, he had a terrible performance. He returned 5 kicks for 52 yards, which is, that's really bad. 52 yards returning, and he's also infamously known as the guy who missed a blocking audible that contributed to a failed 4th and goal conversion tackled from the 49ers' 1-yard line. I did not know that, but for the Bengals fans who missed out on a ring back then. Thank him for it, I guess. And he bounced around the league a little bit, I mean, from Tampa Bay to Cleveland, and he had one of the longer careers for all these guys. A lot of these people I've been showing you have had like 3-4 year careers, but you know, he stuck around until he was nearly 30, so cool for him, I guess. Let's try and speed things up. We are outside the top 10, and we go back to 1971 and Bears running back Joe Moore. Now, Moore was a great running back at Missouri as you take a look at his 1969 season where he put up over 1,000 yards. But unfortunately, in his senior season, he suffered a shoulder injury that put him out for the rest of his college career. The Bears still insisted on taking him number 11 overall anyway, and they drafted him to be the Gale Sayers replacement. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, and I am making an exception putting a player who was pretty wrecked by injuries because I feel like it's a little different when you know what you're getting into as the Bears. He was injured in college, and you still took him at 11 overall. This isn't a player who made it to the NFL and then got hurt. The Bears knew what they were getting themselves into. They still took him anyway. That's a bad pick. And in 1971, he started one game, didn't even play in 72, and in 73... obviously didn't do much and had a career of 281 yards and 3.2 yards per carry. Now, it has been a little while since we talked about a quarterback, so how about we go to pick 12 and the Bears selecting Cade McNown. And this is a guy who I don't really feel like is talked about a lot at all for being a huge bust. I mean, maybe in the Bears community, but just in general, you don't really like associate Cade McNown with the biggest quarterback bust, but he is certainly up there. When it came to Cade's time in college, I mean, he had a distinction that not many quarterbacks can have in college, and he was I believe, one of the only, if not the only one up until that point to start all 4 games in the UCLA-USC rivalry and win all 4 of them. That's a pretty big deal, and, you know, after putting up 2 solid seasons, he was drafted with the 12th overall pick. Now, I feel like his 1997 season was a bit better, but you know, the Bears still seen him as a potential franchise quarterback. But Cade's time in the NFL didn't really treat him all that well. The Bears went ahead and cut their starting quarterback to go and draft him, sign him to this big rookie contract, only for him to get beat out by a former 6th round pick and career backup Jim Miller. So much so that even in his second season, when he went 1-8 and was playing horrendous, the crowd was chanting for Jim Miller to play. He only played 2 seasons and was never in the league again after his second season, and that's just horrendous. I know he isn't some top 10 pick, top 5 pick, you know, blue chip prospect, but quarterbacks like these taken in the middle, late first round still have to be treated as just as big of a bust as the rest of them. Now this next one at pick 13, you have to bear with me here, because this is the only player on this list that I quite literally could not find anything on. James FitzPatrick at pick 13, the German 6'8" tackle, was taken with the 13th pick. I can't even find a picture of him. I can't find anything on him. His entire Wikipedia page just says that he was in the league from 86 to 93. There is no scouting report. There is no nothing on him. You can clearly see he didn't do much. I mean, he lasted in the league longer than a lot of these guys, but 19 career starts and not much else, so for as little notability as he has, I think he qualifies for one of the biggest busts at the 13th pick. We already had one Notre Dame tight end, let's make it 2, as with the 14th pick, it is Derrick Brown. Brown didn't exactly have what you'd call a prolific college career, catching not even 1,000 total yards in 4 years and only 8 touchdowns, but I guess that was good enough to make him a first-round pick in 1992, and sure, as for his career, though, he actually lasted a bit longer than most. Now, for Derrick Brown, I actually do have a note on him, as with the Giants, he did not do much, but in 1995, he was selected by the Jaguars in the expansion draft. But as soon as he was selected in the expansion draft, he proceeded to take a hit so hard in preseason that he suffered bruised ribs, a collapsed lung, damage to his spleen and kidney, was in the hospital for 10 days, and was in a wheelchair weeks after that. But despite that, he went on and played like 4 more years and had better seasons than what he did in New York. Now, that's not saying much, but that's good for him. He caught 1 career touchdown as well, so he made it to the league till 99, and good on him for, surviving that deadly hit. Now, I'm going to be honest, this next one hurts a little bit, as I am a Baylor fan. So at number 15, Corey Coleman. And, I loved the Baylor teams of the 2010s, even beyond RG3, but you had receivers like Corey Coleman, Kendall Wright, and Terrence Williams. The offenses were so fun to watch, and Corey Coleman was arguably deemed to be the best of the bunch from the Baylor receiving corps. He was one of the best receivers in the nation in his final season. He put up a ridiculous 20 touchdowns in 2015. And it made him the 15th overall pick. And after reading a couple of scouting reports on him, there was a lot of mixed opinions. But one that I really seen was said he's just a better Golden Tate is a pretty common thing. Is that they thought he was a Golden Tate-like player, and a lot of people thought better than Golden Tate. Now, obviously, Tate wasn't some superstar wideout, but he was a really nice player, a really good number 2, and a 1,000-yard guy multiple times in his career. And Corey Coleman went to Cleveland, and I know this was a bad Cleveland team. This was like, the Hugh Jackson days, and, he's probably rocking up with Deshaun Kaiser every week, which that didn't help, but Corey Coleman was just not good. Like, I know he didn't have the best help, but, like, he had problem catching the football, and even in Cleveland, he got outshined by, I think this was around the time where Terrell Pryor made the switch to wide receiver. That's how desperate they were for some receiver help, and since then, he's floated around practice squads, I believe. I think he might still be in the league, but I don't know, I think this is very fair to say he is one of the biggest busts, as only 700 yards, 5 touchdowns, and out of the league already, basically. I feel like a separate video should be done on the 2007 draft. Maybe I'll do that, as at 16, we go back to 2007 and go to Justin Harrell. And this is another player like Joe Moore for the Bears, where a team knew what they were getting into when they took him, and I just don't understand a pick like this. His final season at Tennessee, Harrell tore his bicep, and even still, when you look at what he did at Tennessee, he was a basically 1-year starter, and that 1 year, I mean, it was a nice year, but like not spectacular, and still the Packers went ahead, took him pretty high, 16th overall, and did not work out all that much, as he came to training camp looking horrendous. Upon showing up for training camp, he was heavily criticized because he showed up pretty overweight and out of shape, and then proceeded to still sign a 6-year contract worth up to $15 million. He immediately was on the unable to perform list, missed the first 6 weeks, got activated, and then, got injured again. He played out the second half of his rookie season following his Tennessee injury, played sparingly in 08, missed the entire season in 09 with a back injury, and then tore his ACL. So again, this is a player where his career was ruined by injuries, but you still took him knowing he had injury troubles, and he had already gotten a major injury in college, so I can't really give you a pass for this one. Remember when I said earlier in the video that I'd be talking about Jon Gruden and the Raiders again? Well, here we are at number 17 with Alex Leatherwood, and this is the most recent person to be put in this list, 2021, and he's already considered, in my estimation, the worst 17th pick in history. Again, the argument could be made, you're a little too early on this one. It's not fair to write him off like this. But, I mean, when you're a first-round pick and you are off your team in the first year, he started all 17 games and was genuinely one of the worst linemen you will find in the league. And he was a player coming out of college that was very polarizing. Either you thought he was a clear-cut first-round guy, or you thought he was a day 2 guy at best. And I guess I can say I fell more on the day 2 at best side. I didn't really like Leatherwood coming out of college, and a lot of other people didn't either, but the Raiders loved him. They tried him at guard, at tackle, they tried him everywhere. He stunk everywhere, and off the Raiders he went already. So we'll see if he can turn his career around, but as it stands right now, he's pretty clear-cut the worst 17th pick ever. At number 18 now, we go to Rocky Thompson of the Giants, and I can say, in doing my research for this, teams in the early 1970s just did not care when it came to taking running backs. If they seen a running back on the board, they would just take him. Now, obviously, I don't got his college stats or anything. I couldn't find them, or obviously a scouting profile, but the NFL wasn't all that great, as a lot of the early 70s running backs weren't great either. If you want to know what I'm talking about with these running backs in the 70s, I suggest you go look at Rocky Thompson's draft class, the 1971 draft class. So look at all the running backs. Every single one of them was horrible, and Rocky Thompson was one of the absolute worst, as after his rookie season, he started one game in his career, and after his rookie season had 14 carries ever, and he just was out of the league. I mean, the running backs in the early 70s were just disasters. Number 19, we got another quarterback, and it is Cal QB Kyle Boller. And to my knowledge, Boller is the first QB that really became a trend, in the offseason and scouting festivities, where that one quarterback in, your pro day and combine just shoots up the board for not really no reason, but just because he made some really impressive throws. If you want to comp, I'd say Zach Wilson, if you don't know much about Kyle Boller. Not to say him and Zach Wilson were similar players, but similar in the sense they shot up boards because they made crazy throws when, no one was really pressuring him, and you were just kind of playing in shirts, and you're just throwing on the run, doing crazy things, and making trick passes, and doing all these crazy stuff, and the off-platform throws. And with Kyle Boller, he had a cannon of an arm. I mean, there was reports saying he made a 100-yard throw. He had one of the strongest arms you will ever find. And on top of that, he ran, just under a 4.6 in, the early 2000s for a quarterback to run, about a 4.59. That's really impressive. For all those reasons, the Ravens made him their selection. Now, when you look at what he did in his career, it's not as bad as the other quarterbacks. You can even see that in his first 2 years, he had winning records. I mean, his rookie year wasn't too good, but in his second year, 9-7, it's not terrible, but you have to really understand, he was playing with a Hall of Fame defense. He was playing with Ed Reed, Terrell Suggs, Ray Lewis, and he had a stacked team, and still couldn't put it together, and he was drafted purely just off of his raw skills and raw power, and quickly just fizzled out of the starting spotlight, as with Baltimore. By 2007 he was still on the roster and doing nothing. He floated around for a couple more years before being out of the league at 30. But I know he isn't the worst quarterback to play, but it's a pretty bad miss, especially for a Ravens team that desperately needed a quarterback to take them to the next level and get them back into the Super Bowl hunt. This was just a bad pick. Into the final stretch we go. Pick 20, it is defensive tackle Darryl Sims of the Steelers in 1985. And he's another player that I don't have a crazy amount of info on. But as you can see, injuries were not the issue. I mean, he played 16 games, 3 of his 4 seasons. He only had 10 career starts, 3 career sacks. And while I don't have a crazy amount of info on him, I can tell you that he wasn't all that great and wasn't all that productive when he did get to play. So sorry that there's not more info. I tried, I looked, but there just wasn't a lot on him. Now, someone I do got a lot more info on is another recent player at 21, Jalen Reagor. And I tried not to make, in picking who the worst at each selection was, not too much about what they missed out on afterwards. Or you could have picked this person, or you could have picked that person. I tried not to make it too much about that. But this one, it's just unavoidable. It really is. And looking at Reagor's scouting reports, a lot of them did match up with the feelings of many at the time, and myself included, that he could maybe slide into round 1, but he was a really strong day 2 player, and you can maybe slide into round 1. Now, I did see this wild one, absolutely insane. Someone compared him to Stephon Diggs. I don't know who that guy is, but I don't know who let him do that, because that is a wild comp and doesn't even make any sense. But still, we got to talk about the big elephant in the room with Jalen Reagor. And that is that the Eagles at pick 21 selected Jalen Reagor, and it was so baffling of a pick to so many at the time that when they immediately cut to the Vikings war room, people were smiling, high-fiving, celebrating, rushing to make their pick because the Vikings thought for sure that, I'm going to already say, future Hall of Fame receiver Justin Jefferson was just there. And I know you pick what you need and who fits your scheme more, but come on. it was pretty clear cut that Justin Jefferson was obviously a better prospect and a better player than Jalen Reagor. And I know maybe Reagor fit your scheme a bit more, but you just left Justin Jefferson on the board. And I know hindsight again, but even in the moment, a lot of people were very questionable about that pick. And a lot of people had mocked him to go to the Eagles. They thought Justin Jefferson would be an Eagle. So the fact that he wasn't is even more crazy. And the Eagles are never going to be able to live that down. I mean, I guess they're doing fine now. You got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, but imagine if they had Justin Jefferson too. At pick 22, oh, the Browns. You gave me so many options. The Browns had, in an 8-year span, a trio of 22 overall pick quarterbacks that were all busts. Brady Quinn, Johnny Manziel, and Brandon Weeden. And I had my pick of the trio, and I went with Brandon Weeden. I know a lot of people will go Manziel here, but I think the Weeden pick is comfortably worse. Now, is that because Weeden is a worse player than Manziel? Not at all. Brandon Weeden can still hang around the NFL as a backup, and Manziel was out the league pretty quickly. Like, Brandon Weeden objectively is a better player than Manziel, but I just can't excuse taking a 29-year-old rookie. I really can't. Like, I don't see, like, I don't care if they're an amazing player. I'm not taking a 29-year-old rookie. I'm not taking a guy who is walking in potentially on the decline. And I know quarterbacks have a longer lifespan, but a 29-year-old, it's just ridiculous. And not only that, a 29-year-old who had injury concerns coming out of college. When it came to Manziel, there was at least some upside, you know? Like, you could bet on him to try to mature and try to develop. But, like, there's no upside to a 29-year-old rookie. Manziel obviously didn't pan out, but there was at least something to be excited about. There's nothing exciting about Brandon Weeden. There's nothing exciting like, oh, maybe Brandon Weeden can develop into a good quarterback. Like, no, what you drafted is what you got. And what you got wasn't very good. So I would rather swing for the fences and bet on a guy who might be able to put it all together to become good, rather than taking a guy who isn't good walking in and isn't going to get much better. You can argue Manziel is the worst pick, and I won't fight you on it, but I just can't fathom taking a 29-year-old rookie ever in the first round. At 23, it is guard Danny Watkins, and he's actually a pretty interesting player. Now, he was from Canada and was a hockey player and I believe a rugby player, and was also in college a junior firefighter before being recruited to play football at his community college, before then being brought to Baylor. Upon being brought to Baylor, Watkins proceeded to play very well, and in the 2010 CFL draft, he was drafted 4th overall, but he decided to stick out another year at Baylor, and he played himself all the way to the first round of the NFL draft, where he was picked 23rd overall. Now, as you can see his career, he didn't do particularly well in the NFL and was bounced around pretty quickly, left, and I mean, back to back we can see that another old rookie, so I don't approve of that, but good for Watkins. He took that junior firefighting experience that he had from community college, and now he's a full-blown firefighter. So it didn't work out in the NFL, but he's got a good life going on right now, so good for him. We now jump ahead ever so slightly to the 2013 NFL Draft, and defensive end Bjoern Werner, the German DN from Florida State, drafted by the Colts. In 2012, he flashed crazy potential at Florida State, so much so that he was voted the Defensive Player of the Year in the ACC, and the scouting reports on him are very back and forth. He seemed like a very boom or bust player, and I even remember him faintly at the time being that boom or bust type player. A lot of people had him as low as late first round, or as high as even top 3. Now, some of the top 3 projections were pretty wild, but he more fell in line with the late first round projection, and upon being taken by the Colts, he more so showed that he was more of a bust than a boom. Lasting just 3 years in the NFL, he was only able to put together 6.5 total sacks, and he only started 16 of 38 games, so couldn't get in the lineup. I mean, he looked to be maybe potentially banged up. Maybe he was just a healthy scratch in 2015 for a number of those games, but he did not play well, and they even tried putting him as an outside linebacker. He's a 4-3 DN, maybe 3-4 outside linebacker, trying to see where he could fit in. No matter where they put him, it just didn't seem to work out, so Werner quickly flamed out of the league and was, one of those boomer bust picks that unfortunately don't work out, but these are risks that teams are willing to pay to try to get a superstar player. Now on to pick 25, Johnny Rodgers, and in doing the research for this video, again, you learn about some cool players, and Rodgers is a player I'm pretty happy to learn about, as he was very interesting. Now, for Nebraska, he was this running back, wide receiver hybrid, a real, pioneer of being that Deebo Samuel type player. He was absolutely electric in college, and you could see what he did in 1972 in 12 games, having 1,000 yards through the air, 17 yards per catch, 9 receiving touchdowns. But he also added 350 rushing yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. That was enough for him to take home the Heisman Trophy. He was insane. And obviously, it's a good investment to make in the 1973 draft. The Chargers went all in and took him. But his career path wasn't as simple as just flaming out in the NFL. The Chargers absolutely disrespected Rodgers with his contract offer. They offered him for a first-round pick, 4th and 5th round money. So he just straight up didn't sign with them. And he went to go play in the Canadian Football League. And immediately in the Canadian Football League, he won the Most Outstanding Player award, had over, 800 yards in year 1, 1,000 yards in year 2, 800 yards in year 3, 20 yards per catch, 7 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns, another 700 yards here. Every year he basically had 1,000 all-purpose yards when you count his ground attack. Was a Grey Cup winner, all-star. He did everything in the CFL. In just a 4-year career down in the CFL, he was incredible. And he finally decided to come to the NFL, and by then, he was in his mid-20s, and things just didn't quite work out. Though it was not necessarily his fault, as in his first year in San Diego, he had a hamstring injury that, hampered him for his entire first season, I guess his rookie season in the NFL, and he unfortunately did sustain a freakish knee injury in practice, I believe, in his second NFL season, and it immediately ended his career. So again, a player you can argue injuries ruined his career, but, the Chargers disrespected him crazily. I don't know why you take a guy in the first round and offer him 4th and 5th round money. And as you can see, he was a great player in the CFL. And now I know CFL is, some people take that very lightly, but he was a good player when he played. And when he got to the NFL, unfortunately, he got injured, but definitely the most talented player probably on this list, a Heisman Trophy winner, an established star in the CFL, and had his career ended due to an injury, but I thought his story was too interesting not to include. For the 26th pick in the draft, I had 2 very strong options, 2 very strong candidates. I went with Jim Drunkenmiler, and he just barely edged out Paxton Lynch. Yes, Paxton Lynch was not bad enough to be on this list, as Paxton Lynch may have been benched in every single conceivable football league, but I think Drunkenmiler was just a little bit worse. In college, he was far from spectacular at Virginia Tech, but it was enough for the 49ers and, Steve Mariucci to take a shot on him, and this is the part that really gets you, and I think this is what gives him the slight edge. Now, Paxton Lynch was heavily coveted by a lot of teams and was kind of supposed to be the quarterback after Peyton Manning. But Peyton Manning had already retired when the Broncos went all in on Paxton Lynch. When Steve Young was still on the roster, they were saying that Drunkenmiler was the successor to Steve Young. They wanted to push Steve Young out the door, basically, for Jim Drunkenmiler. Now, obviously, history tells us that didn't quite happen, as Drunkenmiler only was able to start 1 game. And he did win that game, but he played horrible in that game. So, yeah, he got the win, and I guess in his career he's an undefeated quarterback, but he was genuinely horrible to the point where even Bill Walsh was openly saying that if it wasn't for the fact that he was a first-round pick and they were paying him money, they would have cut him. And Drunkenmiler was eventually traded for basically nothing, couldn't make any other rosters, had to go down to the XFL, and basically just disappeared. He was genuinely awful. And he threw 1 touchdown in his career, completed 40% of his passes. I know small sample size, but he was just plain terrible. Pick 27, while we don't have any kickers or punters making this list, yes, there were a couple kickers and punters taken, we have a fullback, Jarrod Bunch. I don't even think taking a kicker or a punter in the first round is necessarily the worst thing you could do, because a fullback is an option. I know in the 90s and even before that, fullbacks are a more prevalent part of teams' offenses, and you can see in college he's listed as a running back, but I mean, as you can see, his statistics don't indicate a guy who had a very heavy workload or really was much of any sort of production being put up, and the Giants thought, why not draft a fullback in the first round, I guess? Was Bunch a bad fullback? Well, in his first year, he was just a special teamer. His second year, really nice year, especially for a fullback to gather 500 rushing yards, but it's a fullback. I don't know, like 120 yards and 2 touchdowns doesn't seem terrible for a fullback, but if you're drafting a fullback in the first round and he's off your team within 3 years, that's really bad. So the Giants got little to no value out of that first round pick, taking a fullback in the first. At pick 28, we go with Stanford guard Joshua Garnett, and a very recent, horrendous pick from the 49ers. Garnett did not have the best of injury luck, as you could see in the 2017 season. He missed the entire year, but even when he did play in 2016, wasn't very good. 2018, wasn't very good. Then broke his thumb and missed the rest of the season. 2019, couldn't even get onto the field. In 2020, he went to Washington. Sporadically was like a rotational guy for offensive linemen. Bounced around practice squads and is already out the league. But, I mean, some injuries did hurt him, yes. But overall, he was just a very poor and forgettable player. Pick 29, we stay on the offensive line, Isaiah Wilson. And, you know, along with Larry Stegand earlier at the number 8 overall pick, my money for the least productive first-round pick you will possibly find, and will go down as maybe one of the most forgettable first-round picks in NFL history. If you are wondering, who the heck is this guy? He was drafted in 2020 and I've never heard of him? Yeah, Isaiah Wilson was, you know, obviously in the pandemic draft, and he was on and off the COVID list early on in his career, but after finally being activated, he was suspended in week 13 due to violation of team rules. He appeared in 1 game, getting 1 snap in the 3rd quarter of a Titans win in week 12, and then on February in 2021, he tweeted that he doesn't want to be a Titan anymore, and then deleted the tweet. He was then traded a month later to the Dolphins for essentially nothing, and upon arriving at the Dolphins, well, he didn't arrive. He just skipped the physical and skipped 2 workouts, and 3 days after trading for him, they cut him. Most recently, he was on the Giants practice squad, but literally on January 4th of last year, he was cut, and we have not really heard much about him in his football career since. But now let's move on, as at pick number 30 and 31, we have a little 2-for-1 special for you, as the 1995 draft class spoiled us with garbage, as with the number 30 and number 31 pick, they both are the worst. At number 30, we have Craig Powell. It's always concerning when the Wikipedia page is blank and you can't find really anything on them, and I can find about as much info as Powell was able to find tackles in the NFL. As a linebacker in a first-round pick, was only able to acquire 2 tackles in his entire career, and at the age of 27, he was out of the NFL. I know a couple of years later, though, at the age of 30, he was in the XFL for a year, and then, you know, the XFL died, but so did his career. I don't have much else to really say because I can't find much about him. But let's go to the 1995 31st overall pick. And just like our boy Powell at number 31, Trezelle Jenkins, I don't got a lot of info on him either, but I do have a little fun fact about Powell and Jenkins. As I mentioned Powell's time in the XFL, well, Jenkins was also supposed to be on the same team, the San Francisco Demons, but he didn't even make the XFL team. Powell did, Jenkins did not. As for Jenkins' NFL career, not a whole lot better, as for a first-round pick in a 3-year span, appearing in 9 games and getting 1 start, not a whole lot to really talk about here, as he was, I can't even say he was straight up bad when he played. I mean, he never even played, and out of the league he went pretty soon after, so back-to-back, 1995, really spoiling us. It's been a very long video, a long journey, but we are finally here. The final pick in the first round, and my choice for the number 32 pick is N'Keal Harry. Now, there were multiple times throughout this video for the recent picks where I would be like, wow, that was just a laughably bad pick. Clelin Ferrell, Alex Leatherwood, sorry Raiders, but like a lot of the more recent picks, I would say like, wow, that's crazy. Why would you take Jalen Reagor? But honestly, this is a miss on my part, too. I like N'Keal Harry coming out of college. I thought Harry would be pretty solid. I seen that there were obviously some things he needed to work on, and I don't particularly think the Patriots were a good fit for him because the Patriots break down receivers because the Patriots are just, you know, Bill Belichick is stuck in like the 1940s. But going back and looking at some of the scouting reports, I was not alone in thinking that N'Keal Harry would be a nice player. And honestly, there were people way higher on him than I was because I was kind of shocked when I seen these comparisons. As I like looking at pro comparisons just as a quick abbreviated version to see what people think he will end up being. And one of them was Allen Robinson, and this was obviously, you have to think in the time frame 2018. Allen Robinson, you know, not too far removed off his Jaguar years going into the Bear years. And this is the comparison that absolutely like had me floored. And it was Michael Thomas. Again, not current Michael Thomas. This is the Michael Thomas that was like historic NFL season Michael Thomas, and they said he has the potential to be a top 15 player. That is crazy. Of course, none of that happened, and the guy who was really thought to have great hands coming out of the NFL draft and could really be a guy who could physically go up and get that ball and be reliable had terrible hands and lost all of his confidence. And I think for N'Keal Harry, a lot of it was a confidence thing. I don't think N'Keal Harry really has terrible hands. I just think he has horrendous confidence, and the Patriots didn't take long to put him in the doghouse, and that really hurt him. But for a receiver who has already played 4 years in the NFL, has not even amassed 1,000 career yards, as just 5 touchdowns a season, to see why he is among the worst recent picks in NFL history, and my pick for the worst 32nd pick in NFL draft history. And that will wrap things up. Picks 1 through 32 officially gone through. And I hope you all enjoyed the video. You can feel free to disagree, debate in the comments below. And honestly, I really just hope you all enjoyed it. The research for this video was fun, and doing everything like that was pretty fun to put this together. And as for the content I have been putting out, I've been really trying to just throw a bunch of ideas at the wall, see what sticks, see what people like, what they want to see and everything. So if you enjoyed this type of video, which is my first time doing a video like this, please like it, subscribe, do everything. Let me know what you want to see, because whatever people like the most is what I'm going to keep making. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. Let me know, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.